welcome everybody. We're super excited that you're here. We're super excited to have two guests with us in person and two guests with us online, and all of you here. We really, really want your questions because these guys are here to help you get employed. So we are going to be talking about interviewing for jobs now, which God, seems like it should be easier than it is, but interviewing is a really difficult thing to do, and it's really easy to blow one like immediately, like right off the bat. And so I'm gonna ask the people online to introduce themselves first. Gage, would you give us a start, and Mary Kate next, and then we'll come to our in-person guests, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for the introduction there, Nicole. Super happy to be here. My name is Gage Jenkins, and I am the Assistant Athletic Director for Brand and Ideation at Georgia Tech. I've been here for almost a year now, started last July. And so I oversee our creative services, social and digital strategy for our athletic department, focused on, content creation and the delivery for our teams and different departments.
Welcome, Gage. Thank you. And I know Mary Kate, you've been with us, so I think we have most people have been here. So just which school you're coming to us from?
Yep. I'm the Director of Creative Services at Loyola University Chicago.
Welcome. And then in person, Sammy?
Hi, I'm Sammy Silverman. I am the owner and creative director of my own independent creative studio called Sammy Silv Inc. I work with a variety of different clients. My work is very graphic design focused, art direction, creative direction, motion graphics, illustration, anything really within that realm. And I used to work for Ohio State actually under Andy for several years before venturing off on my own.
Yep. Good to be here with Sammy. Like I said, we collaborate and partner with, and now this dude is doing an awesome job, killing it everywhere you go. So if you haven't connected with him, I would do that. Same Gage and Mary Kate as well, you guys online there. But Andy DeVito, I am the Director of Creative and Branding with our Ohio State Athletics team.
Welcome. So I don't know how else to start this besides starting it, and I can't imagine the number of people who have not gotten jobs because they have blown it in the interview process. So I've done in-person interviewing and Zoom interviewing. One of the most recent Zoom interviews I did, the person laid halfway on the table and twirled her hair the entire time that we did the interview. Other people have their ceiling fans off, which drives me really crazy. I was going to use a different term, but I'll keep that one to myself. Other people don't make eye contact. They dress inappropriately. They do all kinds of things. It seems far easier to blow the interview than to be successful. So I was hoping, maybe Andy, you could get us started here. What are some of the things that we need to know about interviewing both in person and now that we're doing some Zoom interviews as well?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on, there's so many different areas to look at within this space. So like you mentioned, what do you wear? Eye contact is a big thing, how to be prepared, resumes, all that stuff, right? So, I recently was doing some mock interviews for the DACC was up in Delaware where I live with some students, and it was good to continue to get that experience, not only for them and providing them feedback, but also for myself, just to remind me of when I do hire what I'm looking for, right? So, to your point, Nicole, when you're interviewing, the biggest thing is eye contact, being engaged, being a part of it. Because the first thing you notice if you're not, that right away just gonna give a red flag to whoever is hiring you. So first and foremost, for sure, be engaged, eye contact, smile, you are here to interview for a job that you want. So if you don't have that, then I don't know what you're doing, but yeah, for sure, that's of course, I think the number one. Being dressed for the job, just understanding what that is. Sometimes you can be overdressed. I don't know if you can be overdressed, but just understand what the job is you're applying for and making sure that you're dressed appropriately for it. And then, outside of that, it really comes down, we'll get more details, but just how you're presenting your work, how you're presenting who you are, and that sort of thing. We'll touch on that a little bit, but yeah, the main things are visually what you look like, because like we said, that's that first impression you're creating. And then from there, you can start getting into more storytelling.
Yeah. It was mentioned earlier about, be your authentic self. It sounds pretty obvious and basic and easy to do, but From my experience, when I'm either interviewing or I'm the person who is interviewing a potential candidate, you might not get the true person because they're nervous or you're nervous, and they might have a guard up or you might have a guard up. And I find a lot of times like either or, I feel like you're not getting, the true, on both sides. So it's really important to, as the interviewee, as well as the interviewer, to have that genuine conversation. Sometimes what I like to do as an interviewer is ask an obscure question, not something like personal or anything like that, but just like, I remember asking a question just like, what's a weird hobby you're into or whatever, and it completely catches someone off guard, and then you can like laugh about it, and then boom, the nerves are a little calmer, because like this person is probably nervous, especially in your first interview. There's a lot of nerves to take care of, So, from what Andy's saying, the first impression is super important, and that's carrying yourself with confidence, being respectful, being professional. That can go into attire, that can go with how you answer questions, eye contact, how you shake someone's hand, making sure you have a firm handshake. So yeah, confidence is definitely key, and also don't be afraid to interview the person interviewing you. You want this job, but maybe like you want to know about their culture and their fit to see if it's right for you, just like they want to know if you're right for them. So and Andy touched on this, and I think in the previous panel, it's more than just your skill sets and hard skills and whatever, but soft skills as well, your emotional intelligence, your empathy, compassion. How do you handle criticism? So like making sure that you understand what kind of environment it is too, and the people that are going to be working together. I think it's really important to, consider, especially like, not to just jump at any job opportunity, but make sure it's one that fits mutually.
In the previous session mentioned having questions and making sure that you've done your research. Is there, and you mentioned in that previous session some of the right things to ask, but are there things that you see people making mistakes? And I'll be honest with you, when I do interviewing, and at this time of year, I interview about, gosh, it seems 100 people for positions. I'm always like cringe when I say, do you have any questions? And they go, no. So how do you know what are the right questions to ask? What are the questions that perhaps you shouldn't ask because they indicate a lack of research? And kind of how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, anything that you can find out about a school within a quick Google search is something you should then not ask about. You should have done that before the interview started. Then that's a frequent mistake I hear in interviews. Like, where is the school located exactly in Chicago? Is it downtown? Well, you should know exactly where it's at. If you want to work here, you need to find where the school is at. So definitely do research. And in that research, then, it helps you so much during the interview, because then you can start to make connections between yourself and other people in the organization. Oh, like me and so had a mutual stop at a school. Maybe they know someone that I know. And that helps develop kind of like that small talk, before or after the intense interview questions, where it kind of has you drop that guard a little bit that was talked about earlier, that you're kind of more yourself, like you can talk about a mutual thing. It gives you an automatic in almost of just like a commonality that kind of helps. And that all comes back to research.
Gage, I have the great fortune of teaching people how to do interviews. And in truth, one of the things I teach them when they're the interviewer is to not talk sometimes and let people keep talking so that they give you an answer. But as the person being interviewed, we can get into trouble that way. Like we can talk too much, or we can talk too fast, or we can, we don't necessarily hear the question. We're so ready to answer what we think we should be answering. We're not listening to what someone's asking us. How do you, especially for young people who haven't had that experience, how do you kind of navigate all of the inputs that are coming to you when you're interviewing and not screw it up?
Yeah, that's hard, right? Like, I don't think that anyone probably perfects that. I think it comes with getting reps and over time. I mean, I'll be honest, if I'm being interviewed and someone asks me 2 or 3 questions at the same time, for me, just being a person that's like, it's hard to take those and then separate them and think through my response. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, can you repeat that second question or that second part of it? I mean, I think it's okay to say that, especially when you get multiple questions at once and you're getting multiple things thrown at you. Another part of it, and it just comes with getting more reps and time spent interviewing, is slowing down. Like when you are initially getting interviews, you're going to be trying to go so fast and your brain's going to be going so fast. So it's hard to really kind of get comfortable and process what they're saying, take that information, and then try and think of a response, because you just want to respond so quick and just show them, oh yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I know how to answer this. But it really is a matter of, once you get comfortable, just kind of like how they say in sports, right? Like the best athletes, they can slow everything down. And I really do think that is similar to interviewing, is just kind of trying to take your time, take the information that they give you, and be able to process it and give your answer. I really don't think that it's an issue if you, hey, I didn't hear that second part of your question, or do you mind repeating that? I don't remember exactly what you said. And I wouldn't feel embarrassed or beat yourself up about that, because that's bound to happen, especially if they're asking you multiple questions at once.
I'd also add, just really quickly, I love that point, taking your time to answer questions, and don't be afraid to take notes as the interviewee. I always feel like that shows a lot of engagement, that you actually, when you're asking the questions at the end of your interview, it shows that you actually care about those questions. You're not just asking questions to ask questions. You really are taking in the interviewer's answers because you care and you want to remember what they said. Because that comes back to another mistake that I see, is asking the same question at the end of your first interview that then you ask again during your second interview. It's like, well, I remember that I answered that already.
Yeah, I was at a press conference yesterday, and a player answered a question, and then someone asked the question right after it, the same question. And the player literally said, well, as I said 25 seconds ago. It's just so easy to get distracted when you really want this, like you want to do well. And Andy and Sammy, you both mentioned, you mentioned shaking hands and things like that. Like, can you even walk us through, let's say we're doing an in-person interview, when someone walks in the door, what do you expect them to do? Do you expect them to shake your hand? Do you expect them to reach out? What if their hands are clammy? People get really sweaty. Like, there's all kinds of things. I think people just don't even know what they do. And now in COVID times, we really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and especially in COVID times where, it might not be appropriate safety wise to do a handshake. But I mean, in an ideal scenario, if you're walking into an interview, again, it's that professionalism and that level of respect where you walk in, you want to walk in confident, head high, look at them in the eye, introduce yourself, shake their hand, and just, tell them, that you appreciate just the opportunity to be here, the consideration, the opportunity to interview, because that goes a long way. And even like, I know that this might be skipping some things, but at post-interview, it's really nice to either leave some sort of thank you note, whether that is an email, just a follow-up saying, hey, I really appreciate the interview today. Learned a lot. And again, like, thank you for the consideration for this potential opportunity, because you don't want to come off as if you already got it. It's a potential opportunity. Or a handwritten note that goes a massive way. It might not seem like that, but anytime I get a handwritten note, like, I remember that, because that's effort. It is a little bit more effort than an email. But that's not to say that an email isn't a sufficient way of following up. I do actually have an example, because we talked about questions not to ask, and it was the same question really when I was interviewing. So I used to also be the creative director for Ohio State football when we built out an internal team for just specifically the football department. When I was interviewing some candidates to be a part of the internal team, one of the questions I was asked by a couple people was, do we get rings when we win? Or do we get the gear that the players get? And like, those are cool things those are perks that come with the job, yes, but those shouldn't be the questions or the reasons that you're trying to get this opportunity. Those are very small small perks. And when you ask that question, then it makes me think that your priorities and your focus might not be on the actual job.
And that's a perfect segue to you, because I feel like there's so many things that I want to know when I'm interviewing, like how many hours am I really going to be working?
Yeah.
And I'm scared because it feels like people always tell me it's a lot. How much I can get paid, because that scares me too. But those also feel like things that if I ask them, I'm shooting myself in the foot. So how do you navigate things that you really feel like you need to know? I mean, the rings, I want to know, but I need to know.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's definitely a balance between knowing what questions to ask. I mean, if you're very curious and really feel that that's part of something you need to know, then ask it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's whether it's the right question or not. If you really want to know it, then ask it. That's my take on that. But yeah, to Sammy's point, I mean, you got to be mindful of certain questions that may come off as offensive to the person that is interviewing you. So that's just looking at yourself, really understanding, being prepared. I mean, that's the other part, being prepared. Because if you have questions that you're set that you want to answer or ask, talk to somebody first before going to the actual interview. You know, have somebody do the mock interviews are perfect, whether it's you have a friend or a parent or whoever. Just say, hey, I'm interviewing for this. These are some questions I was going to ask. What do you think about it? Right. So again, that's that preparation that Sammy's talking about too. And Mary Kate and Gage, it's being prepared and understanding, okay, here's the question I want to ask. Do they feel offensive? Here's my whatever it is. So getting that intake from others as well is really good. Some other thing that I want to point out too is during the interview is for the younger people that maybe don't have as much experience, because, you know, as myself, I'm saying, hey, okay, can you tell me your experiences about XYZ, right? You might not have that experience, but what I try to do, and this is something I think you guys can really do, is think about just a time in your life. It doesn't have to even be related to the actual position, right? So for instance, I was interviewing some students and I asked them a certain question and they didn't really know how to respond. And then they started talking about their dog. Well, it was a leadership question. I said, tell me about some leadership qualities you have. And they weren't really sure how to do it. But then they talked about, well, I have my pet or I have this dog and I help this person out and whatever else. I mean, that's leadership, right? It doesn't have to be directly related to the job, because when you're younger, you might not have those experiences that maybe the person's looking at, but you do have these personal experiences, right? So that I either help somebody or I volunteer for a soup kitchen or I do this and the other, that somehow can relate to a certain question that you might be asked. So think about those situations as well as you're getting questions. It's okay, well, I'm a designer. Does it have to be related to design specifically? No, it doesn't. It has to be just related to personal experiences. So somehow if you can tie those experiences into what that question is about, I think that's another way you can really look at answering some of these maybe tougher questions.
Gage, we have a question from Cameron. Welcome, Cameron. Thanks so much for reaching out. Asking, what is an ideal time frame for elaborating on questions? How long is too long? And when does an interviewer lose attention?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I really think I hate these type of responses, but I really think it depends on the question, right? I don't think that there's a set time or a specific time for an answer. Like you shouldn't start your watch and say, all right, 30 seconds, I'm gonna answer here. But I think the best advice I've probably gotten is try to be as clear and as concise as possible. And I understand that might be a little bit contradicting when I say be as clear and concise as possible, but also don't shorten yourself if you have a story to tell or you want to elaborate on something. So it's kind of that right blend, right? Like you don't want to be talking about something for 2 minutes, just going on and on about something and there really isn't a point to it. And you're just kind of nervous and really just trying to talk to show that you know, are able to answer the question right, or you're just really unsure. And I think a lot of times when people are nervous, they start to talk and continue to keep going because they get in a rabbit hole. So try and be as clear and concise as possible, but also be descriptive and try and make sure that you have an answer and some meat on the bones when you do answer.
Mary Kate, we also have a question from Jacob who wants to know about receiving a rejection email and asking if it's okay to reach back out and ask what you could have done better or what you were maybe missing at the selection that the selected candidate had.
Yeah, I personally think that's absolutely okay. I think, you know, it shows that they still care and they want to get better. And it kind of keeps that person in the forefront of your mind too, of, you know, if something ends up not working out with your candidate that was chosen, that maybe then that shows this person is still interested. And I always think any feedback can be useful in the future too. Like, it's always appropriate to want to know, you know, how can you get better, and what did maybe something go wrong, or were there certain skills you were missing? And especially now, I think it's become a little too commonplace to just not hear back, to not even receive rejection emails sometimes, especially in college athletics from schools. And so I totally think it's appropriate. Email away, ask.
I just wanted to add, because my little brother, he's graduating from Ohio State this year, and he's going through the first real world experience now. And I had to tell him to not take things personally. Like, if companies aren't responding, or if a recruiter or someone who is emailing you from a company that you're interested in, whether it's a job or an internship, if they're not responding as quick as you'd like, just have some understanding and some patience. Like, they have a lot of day-to-day stuff. It's nothing personal. And just accept, like, it is the reality that you might not even hear back from a job that you apply to or interview. And that's just how it is sometimes. It doesn't make it right. It is, courteous to let someone know, but there are places that do that. And you just got to keep in mind, don't take it too personally. And the age-old saying, when one door closes, another opens, is very true. So if anything, take it as a learning experience.
Well, Amy, if you don't hear back, is there a point when you can reach out to them and say, okay, I can hear back, can you let me know what's happening? And then kind of an addendum to that, when do you become annoying? So, sometimes it takes a long time to fill a position.
Right.
And I've had people call me and say, look, you interviewed me and I have another opportunity, so are you going to hire me or not? And I'm like, not today, I'm not going to hire you. So, how do you kind of navigate when you have needs and they're not necessarily meeting them?
Yeah, I mean, we're of course going through, like I mentioned before, we have 2 open positions right now for designers. And, honestly, I mean, to Sammy's point, it's reaching back out is great, but we have over 100 candidates. So reaching out individually, each one, is probably not something we might do, but we'll see. We'll figure that process out. But yeah, as far as responding back, I mean, it never hurts to reach out to that hiring committee person and just say, get an understanding of where they're at with the process. I mean, I've definitely got emails in the past, just understanding, and I politely to say, we're in the process right now, or if it's already done and they weren't accepted, then yeah, I'll mention that too, to say, yeah, we saw your resume and we looked at it and just didn't fit the needs that we had for this particular position. But let me know. And for me, I say, okay, what else can I do to help you? Right. I mean, again, it's me trying to pay forward always. I'm always trying to find a way to help people out, because I've been there, I've done that. And I know you young people in here, it's like, what can we do to, find ways to connect in everything. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely important or reasonable to reach out to the employer and say, hey, where are we at in the process, if you want to do that. But I would, as far as timeline, some companies are, bigger companies, it's going to take probably longer. I mean, here at Ohio State, it's a 2-week window. We keep it open, and then we'll take a week to look at our top candidates, and then we'll do phone interviews, and then we'll do, in-person interviews. So, by the time we open the position till the time somebody actually is hired is probably 2 months, right? You're looking at 2 months right there. So I definitely give it at least a couple weeks at the least before you would respond back. 3 weeks is probably a good sweet spot, I think, for most people, maybe even a month. But yeah, I think that's kind of a good way to do it. But yeah, for sure. I mean, if you really are interested in that position, then yeah, I would absolutely reach out.
I think that's a great question to ask too during towards the end of your interview. If it's, what is the timeline like on hearing back, or should I expect to hear back by the end of the week, the end of the month, something like that, to then kind of gauge. I know as when I'm interviewing, I like to always try and remember to give that time frame just out of courtesy, but sometimes, questions get away from you, the interview gets away from you, you kind of forget to give the interviewee that at the end. But that is a great question to ask just at the end, like, oh, what is the timeline typically like?
We had a question, I think.
Oh, yes, please. So question is, in the age of Zoom interviews, and we have students who don't have a home office, what are some of the things that they can think about in terms of making it the most professional space possible, considering that we're in somebody's house now? What do you think about that, Gage?
Sorry, was the question the best place to conduct an interview?
Interviews and the fact that students don't necessarily have a beautiful home office like Mary Kate may have, or even the backdrop that you have there. So how do they make themselves appear the most professional they can, given the space? You know, I do a lot of interviews with students in dorms, and then their roommates are like walking in the background, and you know, I'm sure that that must mortify them, even though I recognize that it's the challenge of the day. So what would you advise students to do in those circumstances?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I don't know. Like I don't know that exact answer because I'm not experiencing that now, you know, at this stage in my career. So I wouldn't say I have the most knowledge or recommendation, but I would say that I wouldn't deduct any points if someone were conducting an interview in their dorm. Like I'm not going to hold it against them if they were doing so, especially if I could tell that they took the time to at least make sure that everything within sight isn't, you know, out of sorts, or it's a messy environment. Then I wouldn't hold that against them. And you know, if someone were to conduct an interview in a quote unquote library that, you know, is permissible, I wouldn't hold that against them either. I think that that's certainly okay.
I would say the only thing to add on, and we joked a lot in my office about this during COVID when coworkers of mine, we all went back home, and you know, things are up on your walls that you forget about. But maybe like if you're interviewing at Ohio State, but from Michigan, you might not want a Michigan poster up in the background. Just being aware of, you know, what is visible. And that comes back to practicing too. Hop on a Zoom with someone else and just say, you know, what exactly can you see in my frame? I want to make sure it looks okay. I think that's just a good practice.
I heard a story of someone who wore a backward baseball hat and a t-shirt to an interview, and I mean, they were highly qualified and they did not get that job. So, you know, even though we're doing it on Zoom, you know, what you wear on the bottom may be one thing unless you stand up, of course, but what you wear on the top definitely matters.
Well, and the other thing too, I mean, Zoom, you have a lot of opportunities, right? You can blur your background, simply blur your background, or you can add pictures to your background, right? So there's a lot of opportunities outside of just a blank wall or whatever. But yeah, I mean, what Mary Kate and Gage said, I have no care where you are at, right? If I know who you are and what you do, I'm looking at you as the person. Yes, now they're like they said, how you dress, that's something different. But as far as location wise, I keep going back to, if it's the right organization, if the organization will look at you as a person rather than your situation. But yes, that's a fair question to ask.
So Holly's question is, that Monique Bowman mentioned that you need to, the importance of adding your story when you're interviewing, and how to synthesize that in a meaningful but quick way.
Sure. You can tie it into any question. I used to, you know, when I started this personal branding program for our football players called Brand You, that was one of the things that we touched upon was interview techniques and how, you know, when reporters are questioning football players, they're probably just asking about football related stuff like practice or games. We had a player who was an architecture major. It's pretty interesting because that's a very hard major to balance as a student athlete, let alone just balance in general. So it makes for an intriguing story. So one example I showed them was, okay, if a reporter asks you, they're interviewing you like, hey, you're ready for the big game on Saturday? It's like, yeah, I just need to make sure I get this architecture assignment done so then I can come back and watch some film. So that way you sprinkled a little bit of your personal life in there, your interests. And even though it had nothing to do really with the question, but it was a strategic way of answering it and sharing your story. So same thing with when interviewing for a job, you know, even when if I was being interviewed by Andy and he asked me like what made me get into design in general, I love sneakers. I'm a big sneakerhead. So I always tell people, well, I'm a big sneakerhead. I love sneakers. I want to draw sneakers. I want to design sneakers for Nike. Anyone who ever has interviewed me knew I wanted to design sneakers for Nike. So that way, one, even if I don't get an opportunity at that place, they now know like this person's interested in design for Nike. Maybe they know someone there and an opportunity comes up and they think of you. So there's a lot of different ways you can, you know, depending on the question, whether your strengths, what your weaknesses, just like how Andy, you know, mentioned about someone talking about training their dog. So that way, okay, I have 3 dogs at home. We can talk about that. That lowers the barrier right there. We have a commonality, some common ground there. So really just when you think about the question, it's like, how can I, sprinkle in a little bit of my personal interest in there so they see, a deeper level of me more than just, the surface and the resume.
Barb?
I wanted to go back to your question about the interviews.
Barb is one of our guests today.
I'm just warming up here.
Nice.
Besides thinking about your interviewers, I think it's excellent to think about what environment you're going to feel most relaxed and focused in. Turn off those notifications on your laptop. I would leave your phone in another room. You don't want to hear it, you don't want to think about it. I would have like a glass of just water. I would have a food paper. Think about in what environment you're going to come off with it. And maybe it's a quiet place, or maybe it's an outdoor place with great light, someplace where you feel like you're going to be able to, like I said, 100% focus on the person in front of you. That is one of the biggest challenges all of us can face. Home has really gotten to a lot of us where we're like, I'm going to do this email, I'm going to do this signal, I'm going to do it. And you want to just focus on the person or the camera in front of you.
Perfect.
Failed lesson.
Yep.
Really,
Fire.
chill and relax so that you can not be thinking about anything else.
That's
Or
great.
you have a couple of notes ready to go about those things that you want to sprinkle in. Just like be prepared. They're half the equation, but like you're the other half. So what's your best environment?
That's great advice.
Yes.
So we are just about out of time, and I want to be respectful of that. I do want to just re-emphasize something that was said, which is I never remember people that don't send me messages or personal notes after I do an interview. I always remember the ones who did. So if you think, oh, well, they won't care or it won't matter, I assure you, if anything's going to matter and set you apart from the pile, if you are in contention, it's to acknowledge something afterwards, to reiterate some point or some way to reach out. Even just to thank me for my time is going to go a long way to me remembering who you are. So can we have a round of applause for everyone who joined us? We're going to be at 11:30. Everybody's going to be in here, and we're going to be talking about portfolio creation. Wait for it, and I'll tell you who's going to be here with us. So we're going to do portfolio creation with Sammy, Barb, and thank God Juan Reyes just walked in the door. So we're going to have a great time with that, and then make sure you stay for lunch after.